السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هي الملفات الأفغانية مجموعة من وثائق قوات الدفاع الأسترالية حول عملية القوات الخاصة الأسترالية في أفغانستان، وقد تم تسريب هذه الوثائق إلى هيئة الإذاعة الأسترالية ABC من قبل المبلغ الأسترالي ديفيد ماكبرايد، الرائد السابق في الجيش البريطاني ومحامي الجيش الأسترالي الذي خدم في أفغانستان بين عامي 2011 و2013. وصفت تلك الوثائق حالات متعددة من القتل غير المشروع على أيدي جنود أستراليين لرجال وأطفال أفغان عزل. ردا على التسريب، داهمت الشرطة الفيدرالية الأسترالية مكاتب ABC في حزيران يونيو 2019 وصادرت جميع المواد المتعلقة بالموضوع. إثر ذاك وجهت إلى السيد ماكبرايد 5 تهم، بما في ذلك سرقة ممتلكات الكومنولث والكشف غير المصرح به عن مواد للصحفيين بعد تسريب تلك الوثائق، ومن المقرر أن يمثل أمام المحكمة قريبا. إذا ثبتت إدانته يمكن أن يحكم عليه بالسجن لمدة تصل إلى 50 عاما. ولكن ومن جانب آخر خلص تحقيق أجراه اللواء القاضي بول بريرتون والذي بدأ في مايو 2016 وأعلنت نتائجه في نوفمبر 2020 إلى معلومات موثقة تفيد بأن الأستراليين ارتكبوا جرائم حرب في أفغانستان. اليوم ينضم إلينا ديفيد ماكبرايد من سيدني للإضاءة من الداخل على تفاصيل قضيته وأكثر. أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. David McBride, Australian whistleblower and former British Army major and Australian Army lawyer who served in Afghanistan. Welcome to Min Al-Dakhil from the inside, David.
Thank you very much, Zainab.
Pure pleasure to have you. Well, to begin, David, why have you leaked, or why have you decided to leak to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, ABC? Why them in particular? Why the media?
It took probably about 10 years for me to make up my mind, and there was at least 4 major stages. I was a military lawyer. I believed in the Western democracies. I believed in what we did. I believed I was a lifetime soldier. So it took me a long time before I decided that something was very wrong. One of the things that I first saw was Guantanamo Bay. I could see that the stories we told about the legality of Guantanamo Bay were wrong. And I still worked, they were my team, if you like, and I still, it didn't stop me doing my job, but I was concerned that we were using this legal fiction, putting people in a place where they had no rights. And also I'd been to Afghanistan in the year 2000, the time when the Taliban were in control of that country, and they were the de facto government. And I knew that us denying prisoner of war rights to Taliban soldiers was wrong, because they were soldiers for their country, whatever we may have felt of the regime. But I kept on doing my job. And then in 2009, we had an incident, Abu Ghraib happened before that, and we had an Australian lawyer based in Abu Ghraib, and again, he came out and said there was nothing wrong with Abu Ghraib and everything there was fine. He was obviously, for want of a better word, he was lying. And what I thought was strange about that was when he came back to rejoin the Australian forces, rather than get demoted or in trouble, he was promoted. And that struck me as someone who was involved in a major cover-up. But again, I was a loyal, patriotic person. I did my job. And these were concerning things, but I hoped they were aberrations.
Right.
In 2001, there was another incident where Australian soldiers killed 5 Afghan children. And it was, at best, it was complete incompetence when they didn't have any idea what their actual job was. And they were tried, quite rightly, they were put on trial. And the trial was thrown out of court by Australia's most senior military judge, who basically said there's no case to answer for because Australian soldiers don't owe any duty of care at all to the Afghan civilians. Now, that was clearly wrong. That was clearly quite a terrible thing for a Western government to say, basically, you can kill as many Afghans as you want. It's not a crime. And it was particularly bad because I was meant to teach these soldiers the rules of engagement. I took my job quite seriously.
Okay. That said, David, the documents raised concerns over the organizational culture, including a warrior culture, with particular concern over drift in values among elite Special Air Service soldiers serving in Afghanistan. The culture of impunity that was created and overseen by Army Command. Do you think, David, the war crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan are mainly the personal actions of individual soldiers, or is it a long-standing systematic problem of the Australian Army, or maybe even generally a problem of foreign military presence?
I think it's both. Although I'll qualify that, there was a lot of very good soldiers in the Australian military, especially in the Special Forces, and a lot of soldiers that did the right thing. There were a small group who were very cynical, and I don't think these people didn't make mistakes. They decided the way to beat the Taliban was to be more vicious and extreme than the Taliban, and there was certainly a small group. I don't think I know it wasn't organised, but it say 3 individuals who just decided to murder, and that was a good way to win the war. Okay, now why is it systemic? The systemic problem wasn't with the soldiers, and this is the thing that really sickened me. The systemic problem was with the leaders. They knew, because the people that were doing the murdering weren't junior people. They were the heroes. They were the guys that got the most medals, and the government made things worse by giving these guys medals and making them heroes. And anybody who spoke up against them, and there were, to their credit, Special Forces people who said this is wrong. You need to look into this, and they were risking their own life by doing that. They were ignored and they were shunned. And that is the disgraceful thing. The blame doesn't lay with the soldiers so much. It lays with the Australian government, who knew what was going on. And that's what really tipped me over the edge, was the Australian government they knew something was up. They knew it could reflect badly on them. They knew the International Criminal Court, this is 2012, would be investigating them. And in order to protect themselves from the International Criminal Court, they started prosecuting soldiers who had done nothing wrong. So they were protecting the murderers and prosecuting innocent soldiers. Now that tipped me over the edge. I said, this is a disgusting thing where we will throw junior soldiers to the wolves in order to protect politicians from justice from the International Criminal Court.
Right.
Now that is disgusting, and that is a systematic problem, and I think the Americans would be exactly the same. I think the British were exactly the same. The British have done something similar where they ostensibly investigated war crimes, and they made a big fuss of it for many, many years. And then not a single British soldier was convicted. And
this is utter impunity, David. But your case, Well, Justice Paul Brereton report released in November 2020 found Australian Special Forces unlawfully killed 39 unarmed prisoners and civilians in Afghanistan. David, if the report was released, why are you still facing charges? I mean, it is unfathomable. Doesn't that war crimes report vindicate you?
Yeah, look, it does.
So?
And the reason I'm facing charges is because, as I said, the problem is much bigger than a couple of unarmed soldiers. The problem was with the war. The problem is with the war aims. We were really just there to keep the Americans happy. And because there were no clear aims about what we were trying to achieve, soldiers necessarily got bored and got frustrated. And the reason they won't let me off is because, a bit like Julian Assange, I've exposed the truth, and the truth is at the top levels, and they really don't. They're angry at me for saying it's not just about the soldiers. It is about the leadership, both of the Defence Force and of the country. And those need to be looked at, and they hate that.
Yes. Allow us, David, now to stop for a short break, and then we will continue digging more into the case of David ماكبرايد, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. ديفيد ماكبرايد, Australian whistleblower. Welcome back, sir. Justice Brereton also recommended no action be taken against key individuals who helped bring the war crimes to light. He said, quote, "Perhaps the single most effective indication that there is a commitment to cultural reform is the demonstration that those who have been instrumental in the exposure of misconduct or are known to have acted with propriety and probity are regarded as role models. Should whistleblowers be charged for releasing material that is in the public interest?" This is my question.
It's a good question. You speak like my lawyer. You'd be good. And that is... It's particularly interesting because the government has confirmed my story was a public interest story. The journalists from the ABC that published the information, they were investigated and they were under the threat of being charged. Now, eventually, the government formally stopped those prosecutions and said, in their reasons for stopping the prosecutions, the story was in the public interest and it's not in our... the government does not prosecute journalists for publishing public interest stories. So they've admitted the information wasn't the public interest. So it is going to be very hard for them to explain why the journalist's story was in the public interest, but me giving the information wasn't.
Now, David, we all know that you studied law at Oxford University before and worked as a lawyer in the army. Do you think the accusation against you is a fair performance of the Australian rule of law society, or is it a humiliation to the democratic rule of law system in general?
Well, it's the second explanation. There is no rule of law in Australia. It has become quite disgusting. The government wheeled out that excuse quite recently for not doing an investigation of a very, very serious crime against the man who's actually in charge, or was in charge, of law and order in Australia. Now, the government does secret trials. That's not part of the rule of the law. The government bugs phones of people like myself. The government actually uses the security services to harass me. That's not part of the rule of law. The government does things like censor documents. They block freedom of information. They keep Julian Assange in jail, even though he, like myself, has committed no crime. He's simply upset the Americans. There is no... Australia is a sunny place, but it has become a police state. You can live okay if you don't upset the government, but if you upset the government, you could be put in jail forever. We've already had one, we know of one case in Australia where a man was put in jail under a secret name with a secret trial, and even the head of the prison didn't know he was a national security prisoner. Now, as far as we know, there's about 20 more people in the same boat. We know that the equivalent of the CIA, the Australian Foreign Intelligence Services, bugged the officers of the East Timorese government in order to benefit an oil company. Now, and when these people, because the oil company gives money to the political party, one of those people involved, who was like me, an honest security service worker, said this is wrong, and guess who's going to jail? Not the oil company, not the foreign minister who approved it, but the guy who said this is wrong. It's disgusting. Australia is in a bad place.
Right. Now, what do you think of the moral, legal and economic support of the Australian public and media for your case, David?
I'm pretty happy with the support I've got. Obviously, it's a long road. It's a bit, the way I paint it in my mind, it's a bit like the Second World War. It's a 6-year campaign, and each day we get small victories. As I've said, the people who are supporting me in years to come will be seen as the heroes of a movie. They have come out for me every day. There are politicians that support me now, which is fantastic. There's at least 3 federal politicians that speak on my behalf, and we are growing. We've got a lot of donations. I've got a lot of well wishes. As I said, it's become a bit of a police state. A lot of people support me. Some people are scared to express it, but the average person supports me, and the press has been very good. I can't complain about the press coverage I've had. The major companies have been very fair, because I think that they can see I am a middle-class, educated bloke who believed in Australia. I absolutely in Australia. And when I found out that our elected politicians and our most senior military members were largely charlatans of the highest order, it really hit me quite hard. And that everything we say we are doing in the foreign affairs space is pretty much a lie.
Yes, they are preaching what they do not practice, and this is really a shame. Now, the trial date of the case has been postponed for national security reasons. When is it determined now? And do you think that postponing the trial is shielding certain officials and soldiers who committed the crimes against civilians, Afghani civilians?
Oh, undoubtedly. Everything in Australia is run for public appearance. In the biggest department, and probably the most effective department in the Australian military, is their public relations. They have hundreds of people working for them. They're putting out false stories day in, day out. And yeah, everything, trials are delayed, charges are trumped up. Everything is done in order to make sure that the government comes out of looking well. It's a whole, there is more effort. This is one of my central problems. There is more effort in the Australian government spent on appearances than there is on actual governing the country.
David, who in the Australian government, in the parliament, military, publicly expressed support for your brave disclosure of war crimes? Who else sympathizes with your situation but doesn't perhaps publicly support it?
Well, many members of the military sympathise with me, but they are, as I said, it's a police state. They would be afraid to call me, but people sometimes come up to me in the street and they say, more people support you than you realise. We are afraid, but keep up the good work. And that I find very heartening. I can understand why people don't come forward, because your life can be ruined by support. Andrew Wilkie is a guy who supports me. He's in Parliament, and I get great pleasure out of him supporting me, because he was in a similar position to me in relation to the Iraq War, and he knew that the government was putting out lies about the weapons of mass destruction. He resigned, I think, and he's now in Parliament, and so it's great to have him on side, because if anyone knows what I'm going through, he does. And there are two from the Green Party. They've been very supportive. They're only very small in government, but that does help. And the fact that members of Parliament support me is good. We've had some members of the Australian Labor Party, with the sort of opposition, have supported me. They do it in fairly muted fashion.
Excellent. Right.
But at least tide is turning.
We hope so.
We will win the.
But from your personal perspective, David, do you believe in the judiciary, and are you optimistic or pessimistic about the Australian judicial system?
I'm optimistic, and that was one of the reasons why I was happy to get charged. Life has got better for me since I got charged, because I've never wanted to avoid prison. I wanted the issues to be looked at, and I knew that if I got in front of a judge, all the spin, all the lies that the government can put out will not help them once we're in a courtroom, and once I can put a general in the witness box and say, did you know there were war crimes committed in 2012? And I've always wanted to be in front of a court, because I always thought the Australian judges are very fair people, and the system of justice in Australia is a good one.
Right.
So I had faith in that, and I still believe that. I've been treated very fairly by the courts. I've been treated very fairly by the police. And I've said if I've committed a crime, I'll go to jail happily, because I did to make Australia a better place, not just now, but for my children and their children's children.
Right, David Mcbride, Australian Afghan Files whistleblower, thank you very much for sharing your story from the inside and for not turning a blind eye to the murder of innocent civilians.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you for having me and helping me spread the message.
Always a pleasure to have you. Bless you and be safe. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.